Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. This is a channel where I discuss all things long COVID. My name's Adam. I'm a COVID long hauler on my 16th, almost 17th month now. And I was writing a thank you note this week. And I wanted to touch base with you guys and make a video about something that's been helpful for me during my recovery. So the thank you note was to an occupational therapist at the hospital where I was seen at the long COVID clinic. And this person was probably the first person in my long COVID journey from a position of authority who actually believed me and made me feel heard and went out of her way to do whatever she could to help me. Now, even though long COVID was so new to me and to many of her patients and to her, she came up with different resources and exercises and all sorts of different things for her patients to try and use. And she brought these things in from her, her stroke patients and her TBI patients and people who had really bad brain injuries, and she was using them for us with long COVID, specifically for me, neurological long COVID. So she was very helpful for me, and I don't know why it took me so long to reach out. She luckily was still in the program, the long COVID program at the hospital, and I drafted up a beautiful thank you note because there are those people, and it was her and my family doctor that I've written these notes to. But long story short, the subject of this video is occupational therapy and physical therapy for long COVID. So about month 4 in my journey, I was able to get into the long COVID program at the hospital. And I didn't really know what to expect. My doctor had written a referral a month or two prior to that. And when I got the acceptance, I was so excited. I mean, I had no idea what to expect because regular doctors hadn't been able to help me at that point. Of course, like probably a lot of you, I thought, oh great, I'm going into this amazing program. I'm going to get to see neurologists and doctors and specialists. Well, that's not how it turned out. I don't think that's how it turned out for a lot of people. So they did blood work and they took in my CT scan that I had had and my MRI. I don't think anybody really looked at it. But what they were doing with long COVID patients was occupational therapy. So interesting enough, the occupational therapist told me, like, the program, they don't really know where they're going with it. They were learning at the same time as their patients. And for me, I was one of the first people in this program in my area. So I was kind of like a lab rat, and that's okay. I mean, I was all right with that at the time. I didn't really know what to expect. I think I expected more, but looking back now, the things that this person helped me understand about how to heal were the core fundamentals of how I began my healing journey. The occupational therapy session for long COVID began with standard tests for brain injury, basically. So they would give you questionnaires and tests and, can you remember? They give you a string of sentences and how far along can you remember. They would give you different quizzes, even building blocks, and, try and replicate this shape and paper clips and stuff. Like at that time, like a lot of this was tough for me. And I was kind of borderline for brain injury, I guess she said. So they put me onto brain training apps like Luminosity, and it's kind of fallen off that I haven't done a ton of that since then. But when I'm looking back, it was a huge thing for me. Every day I had to log in. I do my five exercises on there. But some of the stuff that she did for me was manual manipulation called craniosacral therapy, and I won't begin to try and get into the complexities of it. But it's a form of massage, and it's very, very light touching. It's outside of the long COVID clinic. It's done by a osteopath. So that's who I see now every few months, an osteopath to do this craniosacral work, where it's just light touch, and it was almost it's like a myofascial release, it was called. So she put me on a bed, like a massage table, laying down and put her hand underneath my head and kind of like supported my skull, and just slowly pulled out her hand from underneath my skull. And my hands were laying flat on the mat. Honestly, like, it was almost like magic what happened. It was, my heart rate at that point was at 120, 110, 120, resting, like just laying there. And that was common for that point in my recovery, but my heart dropped down to 55 by the time that this exercise was done. And I think it was about 4 minutes that her hand was slowly coming out from underneath my skull. And I hadn't had any relief up until this point. This was at 4 months. And I was having constant panic and constant adrenaline surges, and this kind of quieted that. And it was crazy. It was almost like this revelation that, okay, there's things that we can do. They might not be pills or traditional, but there's things we can do. And that's why she was so great. She said to me, there's not a whole lot we know, and we're trying to use alternative methods. And by that, I mean, I think the occupational therapists in this program, we're trying to use alternative methods to help us folks with long COVID. So that's definitely one to look into. Myofascial release and craniosacral work, and there's lots of practitioners and osteopaths all over the world who do this type of work. And just YouTube it, just Google it, and see what's involved and see what it does for you. There's all sorts of different fascias and tension, and probably that we store trauma in certain places. I've talked a lot about the vagus nerve and vagus nerve exercises, devices, and things like that. And I'm sure that this is all part of that parasympathetic nervous system and getting that to activate. So it's almost like it was a manual manipulation of kicking that parasympathetic nervous system on and calming that fight or flight. For me, that maybe lasted an hour, but the relief was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then I would go back. I think I had about 4 appointments at this clinic, so it lasted about a month. So by the time I was released, I think it was at 5 months in my journey, and I was starting to get a little bit better. And I continued to see an osteopath after this, once every few months to help with releasing tension and trauma and things like that. That's like your body's constantly in panic mode. Of course, you need to release some of this trauma. So look into an occupational therapist if you haven't. It doesn't necessarily have to be through a long COVID clinic. This is just what they were doing with their long COVID patients in the area, and it was very helpful for me. Next, we talk about physical therapy. So I would say about 8 months into my journey, I found a program. It started as online based because of COVID. So it was through FaceTime basically, or it was through Zoom. And it was a program put on by one of the franchises of physiotherapy clinics in my area. So they had put together a long COVID program, and basically they were just trying to treat PEM. So making sure that when you were ready to go back to working out or walking or leaving your house or running or whatever it may be, that you did it at the right pace for you. So pacing wasn't a huge part of my journey, and I think you guys know that, but any of you that have these post-exertional malaise symptoms or issues, definitely look into a physiotherapist who has looked into long COVID and who knows how to treat someone with this type of issue, right? Like there's people with chronic fatigue syndrome and ME that like have had this post-exertional malaise for a while, so it doesn't just apply to long COVID. But they helped me by, it was done through either an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, and we tracked my resting heart rate as well as my what's the name of that, the score that you get for the rest of the day. But anyways, we tracked my resting heart rate, and we went from there. So we slowly integrated exercise back into my daily life. Started with really small walks, and then some light walk run type thing, like walk, jog. And that seemed to be a little bit much at the time, so we went back to walking and a little bit of weights. And that's kind of where I found my strength, was with the weights. I think it because my heart wasn't going too high, so instead of like doing running and things like that, I started with weights, and I built it up from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 15 to half an hour, and then to an hour, which is what I'm at now, 4 or 5 days a week in the gym. That was a big step for me too, was actually leaving the comfort of my house, going out into the world and getting back to the gym. So the physiotherapist that I worked with was super helpful for that, and knew how to adjust my exercise for the week, and made sure that I didn't have POTS and all sorts of things like that. So if you do have any heart rate issues or breathing issues or heart issues, definitely look into a physiotherapist to help you. And if you're having those issues where you do try, and it doesn't even have to be working out, but like if you try and wash the car, or do the dishes, play with your kids, and you're having like this crash for a day or a week or weeks after, look into a physiotherapist who can specialize in long COVID or CFS, and just talk to them about what kind of program they run and how they could help you. So somebody I didn't know I would ever need, somebody who I thought this is who you go to if you break your leg or you're in a car accident. No, they've worked with people who have these types of things before, and if not, they're learning, right? Because there's so many of us out there now who have this long COVID disease, so, or chronic fatigue. So look into a physiotherapist, and definitely look into a occupational therapist, because they will be super helpful for you, I think. And do your own research and find someone in your area who can help you. Anyways, guys, I hope this video helped, and I hope you're doing well on your healing journey. I'll talk soon. Thanks. Good night.